George Soros is well known to you as an extraordinary investor. He is also, in a very passionate way, a champion of many causes, some of them very difficult ones. Others would describe them as hopeless. His foundations contribute $850 million a year to programs in over 100 countries. And this morning, he announced an initiative which is very much in the spirit of the Private Sector Summit on Migrants and Refugees, which involves providing up to $500 million of his own private capital to invest in startups and larger enterprises and enterprises owned by refugees and migrants that address problems related to or challenges related to refugees and migration. He also announced a much more modest initiative that has to do with another theme at this summit related to the private sponsorship of refugees. Let's welcome George Soros. Thank you.
All right.
Good morning. Mr. Soros, you have invested a great deal of your energy over the past years to mobilize the international community to react more effectively to the refugee crisis. Why has it seized you so much?
Well, I am a refugee myself. In those days, there were fewer of us around, and we were better treated. So I prospered. But when I set up foundations, they always played a prominent role in the work of the foundation, wherever it was, whether it was the Rohingya in Asia or unaccompanied children coming to the United States.
Right. So your foundation has done a great deal of work with refugees, but you've also been concerned with economic migrants.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're making that distinction, because the refugee problem is something new. It has come to dominate the scene in the last few years. But migration has been going on forever, and it's the OECD just published its 40th annual report on migration. We have been at it only for 25 years, so we are relative newcomers, but we are very, very much involved in economic migrants as well.
From the Gulf to
the migration problem.
The United States with the Emma Lazarus Fund, I think you set up in 1997.
Yeah.
So this morning you announced an initiative to invest $500 million of your own capital in businesses related to, that address challenges related to migration and refugees. What motivated this initiative?
Well, President Obama issued a call to action, which asking U.S. companies to play a bigger role in meeting the challenges posed by refugees and migration. And this happened to coincide with a growing conviction among us in the foundation that giving grants and political advocacy is not enough, that we need to enlist the private sector and we need to tap into the entrepreneurial spirits and the technological innovations of the business sector. So in response to this appeal, I've earmarked $500 million to invest to address this problem.
And how do you intend to use those funds? Where will they be deployed?
Well, we'll invest in startups and established companies, social impact initiatives, and businesses started by refugees and migrants themselves. And we'll seek investments in various sectors, among them, for instance, digital technology, which seems to be particularly promising as a way to provide solutions to the particular problems that dislocated people face. And I have my experts to explore all the possible avenues. The investments are intended to be profitable because that's what is needed to attract the business community. Our goal is to demonstrate how the private sector can make sustainable and enduring investments in ways that improve prospects for migrants and the countries in which they live.
So given your track record, no doubt these investments will be a big success. What will you do with the profits?
Well, all the investments will be owned by my not-for-profit foundation. Therefore, all the profits will go to fund the programs of the Open Society Foundations, including programs that benefit the migrants.
So how can you make sure, though, that the investments benefit migrants and refugees?
Well, there you raised a crucial question. We'll work closely with organizations like the UN Refugee Agency and the International Rescue Committee to establish guidelines, guiding principles. And these principles should inform not only us, but also all the other people, the businesses that will participate, and how successful those principles are will determine how successful this effort is. It's the measure for our success.
It's interesting to see the two sides of your life coming together. Your acumen as an investor now meeting your interest in the public good. It's a very big challenge to take on.
Well, I try to live up to that.
So let's discuss the European refugee crisis. It's an issue that has seized you from very early on. When Greece was plunged into a depression, you started a foundation there, Solidarity Now, to help both Greeks in need and also migrants who were trapped there. And that foundation is now playing a really serious role in Greece. Back in 2014 and 2015, I remember you were meeting European leaders and trying to persuade them to reform the European asylum system in anticipation that something like what we've seen over the past 2 years could happen. It seemed back then that there was a solution possible, but it didn't transpire. What went wrong?
Well, I've written a book about it, the tragedy of the European Union, so I don't think I can tell you in a few words.
But that was that was a book that dealt with more than the refugee crisis. Let's focus on what turned the refugee crisis or problem into a political crisis.
Well, I analyzed that problem in detail in an article I wrote in Foreign Policy. So I would recommend that to people who are interested in it. But let me make a crucial point. The refugee crisis is a complex problem, and it has no simple solution. Anti-European and xenophobic political movements provided simple answers to a complicated problem, so they were by their very nature misleading. And this reinforced the disintegration of the European Union that received a tremendous boost from Brexit. So we must now find some way to prevent the process from reaching its ultimate conclusion. I consider this the most pressing problem, and it is the top of my priority.
I have no doubt that you have plans to try to keep the European Union together. Let's return to the refugee crisis. The European Union, and led by Chancellor Merkel, negotiated an agreement with Turkey. What do you think of that agreement?
Well, the deal with Turkey suffers from four fundamental deficiencies. First, it's not truly European. It was negotiated and imposed on Europe by Chancellor Merkel in dealing with Erdogan. Secondly, it's severely underfunded. We estimate that it will require at least 30 billion euros a year for a number of years to succeed. Third, it has transformed Greece in a de holding pen, which is very inadequate and unacceptable. But most importantly, the plan is not voluntary, and you can't impose quotas that many member states and many refugees strenuously oppose.
So you mentioned the foreign policy article that you published this summer, and you've written elsewhere about this as well. And you've spoken to European leaders about a comprehensive plan to deal with the refugee crisis. Can you share with us what that plan looks like?
I'll try, but I need to use my notes because it's not so simple. So the plan is built on 7 pillars. First, the European Union must take in a substantial number of refugees, a minimum of 300,000 a year, directly from the frontline countries in a secure, orderly way. This will be far more acceptable to the public than the current disorder, and it would deter genuine asylum seekers from coming illegally. Second, the EU must regain control of its borders. There is little that alienates and scares the public more than scenes of chaos. Third, the EU must find a way to generate economic growth, which would make all its problems easier to solve. We estimate that the refugee challenge alone will require at least 30 billion a year for several years. My plan explains the benefits of what we call surge funding in greater detail. Fourth, the EU must build a common mechanism to protect borders, determine asylum claims, and relocate refugees. Fifth, we need a voluntary matching mechanism to relocate the refugees. The EU can't coerce member states to accept refugees they don't want or force refugees to go where they are not wanted. And we cite Canada that sets a standard. And this comparison shows how far the EU has to go. Sixth, the EU must offer far greater support to countries outside its borders that host a large number of refugees. And also, it must be more generous to Africa. It can't use development funds to serve its own needs. It has to offer a genuine grand bargain, which means creating jobs in African countries where migrants originate, which would reduce the number of people that want to migrate to Europe. And the final pillar is to create a welcoming environment for economic migrants. All the evidence shows that migrants can contribute significantly to innovation and development if they are given a chance to do so. Now, Europe has a serious demographic problem, and many development countries, particularly in Africa, have a serious demographic problem in the opposite direction. A more welcoming environment in Europe would help to solve both problems. So I wanted to read this in detail to show that this is not a simple solution for a complex problem.
So what are you and your foundations doing to try to reach this vision that you have for Europe and Africa?
Well, our biggest contribution is in Jordan. We played a leading role last February in a fundraising conference in London under the joint sponsorship of Chancellor Merkel and then Prime Minister David Cameron. Our roadmap was distributed to all the participants in advance, and it focused on Jordan as the most promising partner. And we've been working with Jordan closely ever since. We just had our new meeting with current meeting with King Abdullah and his team just this last Sunday. And we'll be also looking very closely at Jordan in the context of our $500 million investment program, because it's a country of great strategic significance with a forward-looking government, and I'm confident that there will be investment opportunities there that meet the criteria of our initiative. And I would also urge other investors to take a close look at investing in Jordan. Our foundation are active in many other parts of the world. We are supporting the education of refugees in Turkey and in Europe, for instance. Our migration grant-making program is working to improve conditions for migrants and host communities all around the world. We are also working with the government of Canada, which has been very successful in integrating refugees, and the UNHCR, which has been a stalwart defender of refugees and their rights. Our goal is to promote the Canadian model of private sponsorship for refugees in countries elsewhere in the world. This is a much more modest joint initiative than the $500 million that we are discussing. We will be contributing some hundreds of thousands, not millions. But I hope it can do a lot to energize citizens and integrate refugees.
So if you look ahead of you, it's a 00 there, which is a kind of scary number for an investor. Do you have any last thoughts? I think we're being asked to wrap it up.
Well, if you compare where we are and where we ought to be, then you can see how far we have to go. And there is no time to spare. So we must all pull together in order to get there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Soros.
Yes.
30 seconds. Just one announcement. This is the beginning of the strategic dialogue part of the Private Sector Summit on Refugees and Migration. For those of you who have been invited, it's an invitation-only event. please note that you have to go downstairs to the lobby where there's a second registration process. And we welcome then everyone to join here during the closing call to action at 5:45 p.m., where we'll be summarizing what's been concluded during the discussions today. Thank you again, Mr. Soros.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join us for a refreshment in the foyer. The summit will resume at 10:40.